Principle of justice has been thoroughly corrupted by the modern world, and this has left all of us defenseless from those at every level of society that would seek to wring out harm against us. And unfortunately, the story of Iryna Zarutska, a Ukrainian refugee who came to America seeking safety, whose life was cut short by a career criminal who should have never been let out, should have never been out in the street, is a painful reminder of this. But whereas many people are attempting to pin this tragedy on the issue of race, issue of tribalism, or more so the issue of weaponized empathy, very few people are actually looking at the foundations of how this kind of thing can happen in the first place, and they are obsessed with the symptoms of what the foundations bring forth. And so I think any fruitful analysis of this issue is going to focus on two dominant aspects. Number one, the redefinition of justice in the modern world by foolish activists who think themselves wise, which enables destructive and bad behavior. Number two, and this is going to be the more uncomfortable part, but the truth will set us free. Number two, our society's inability and unwillingness to reckon with the fact that there are people that walk amongst us that look like humans, who in all reality are fundamentally monsters down to the core of their nature. And our inability to recognize that leaves us as a society unguarded against them and allows events like this to happen. So my friends, in this video, we're going to get right down to brass tacks. We're going to explore the philosophical, moral, and social dimensions of this issue. And I'm going to provide a roadmap of clarity to help defend ourselves as a society against this kind of thing, and to hopefully provide some kind of enlightenment as to how this could possibly happen in this way. But before we get into that, my friends, hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Watson. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can, my friends, to ensure this project is successful. My friends, this is a civic conservative project. If you believe the fundamental philosophical and moral character of the American founding generation is worth preserving and pushing through into our modern world, and the Enlightenment values that underpin it are also worth proselytizing, and if you believe that America is worth defending from cultural coercion and those who would seek to destroy it through uncharitability and revolution, then I would encourage you to like, share, comment, subscribe, join this channel, become a part of the Pensive family, and of course you can also do it by commenting, letting me know your opinions. My friends, thank you so much for being here. Now, please enjoy the video. So, Iryna Zarutska's untimely demise, again, is a rather unfortunate phenomenon that gives us a lot of room to work for a solution if we understand exactly where to look. I will not mention the name of her attacker, but I will provide some context as to the attacker's background to help kind of frame this. The attacker was a rather unwell man who, according to a police report, reported that he thought his body was being controlled by a man-made material, and the police, rather than going ahead and institutionalizing him or separating him from society, simply said he was dealing with a medical issue, and they left his home that night after that. He also has a violent history. Apparently, he attacked one of his family members. He had been in jail as well previously for violent offenses. Apparently, he was out on bond at the time that he attacked Iryna Zarutska on the train. And so, very obviously, this career criminal his history had been well known, and he had been enabled in one of the worst ways. Which is one of the reasons why I say you don't understand this issue without first understanding how generally the idea of justice has been redefined and corrupted by our modern world. Justice used to be known as a principle that preserves persons, possessions, promises, and goodwill. In fact, Cicero, in All Obligations, one of the most brilliant moral tracts ever, clearly said justice was meant to preserve the fetus, F-I-D-E-S, which is a Latin word that means loyalty, goodwill, faith, from which fidelity comes from. And justice founded upon the fetus then protects everything that is a result of that fidelity, that is a result of that goodwill, like a skyscraper rising up from a stable foundation. But unfortunately, justice has been changed from that principle which protects possessions, persons, and property, and goodwill and covenants and contracts, to being a principle that redistributes and distributes resources and privileges to certain groups over others in the name of equity, to supposedly correct some kind of moral wrong that happened to somebody by virtue of their membership in a particular group. And this enables bad behavior because it allows the person that believes in this distributive view of justice, that is so called, to to excuse certain kinds of behavior by appealing to the status and the circumstance of those who commit the kind of moral wrong. It allows them to operate with a kind of faux benevolence in their head, which divorces them from duty, and benevolence divorced from duty is simply a chaotic sentiment waiting to wreak destruction upon those who it comes into contact with. Because no moral principle can exist if it is not corrected by another moral principle, which is why I say people that say dignity ought to be the reason that illegal immigrants get to stay in America. Well, dignity is a moral principle, but so is fidelity. And if one's presence in this country violates fidelity, why should the principle of dignity, which is simply you getting what you deserve, overtake fidelity, especially when the dignified thing would be for them to get what they deserve, which is simply to be removed from the country? Different story, different day. Made a whole video about that, but this is just to show you the connection between different principles. They don't operate in a vacuum. So justice, by being torn down, has essentially enabled benevolence to be used as a manner to excuse certain kinds of behavior and to reduce the safeguards, like, for example, cash bail being a thing, like, for example, people being imprisoned for the same period of time, to reduce the safeguards that allow us in society to be protected from those who would seek to do us harm. Justice, real justice, comes from two places. It comes from our moral sense, which is our inherent understanding of what is right and wrong, which is located at the throne of our hearts, right here where I am pointing it. For those of you who are watching the video, for those of you who are not, just visualize the middle of your chest. It's located right there, and it allows you to understand and have a moral reaction to something before it even gets to the reasoning stage. Because you have to understand there are several processes by which we understand things and which that understanding becomes a behavior. Sometimes the beginning process is we feel it through our moral sense. Second process is we process it through our conscience and we reason with it, and then that becomes behavior. So justice immediately comes from our moral sense because it is an enforcement of what we know to be right and wrong. But it secondly emerges from our sociable nature as human beings, our sociability, which is the natural desire for man to enter into covenant, to enter into interaction, intercourse with other members of society, and therefore create civilization. Justice exists to refine the moral sense into a tool to defend civilization. But when justice becomes a matter of redistribution, privileges, and resources, it becomes a matter of utility, and it can take the image of whoever has power, and therefore it becomes an empty principle that can then be used to justify and protect and enable destructive behavior. And by the fact that he was out in the streets, the killer of Iryna was out in the streets, demonstrates this misuse, this hollow utilitarian idea of justice, which has wrought forth an incredible amount of harm and pain upon a family that now has lost their daughter. But given the fact that justice does come from the moral sense, we all have a sense of justice in our own personal lives and our own conscience. But there are people that walk among us, my friends, whose conscience is not operating, whose moral sense was never with them, or if it was with them, it was destroyed through some kind of behavior that altered their psychology. And this is the category of the monstrous human. This is the category of monstrous man. And we must be willing to talk about this. Because it's very easy to point at a violent offender and say, okay, let's deal with them, and look at him in isolation and have all kind of different theories as to why he did what he did. But it's much harder to understand that he is simply one subcategory of a broader category of people that look like you, who have a human frame, but whose psychology, whose essence is so inhuman. And some of them are better than others in hiding it, and for years getting away with doing fraudulent behavior, manipulative behavior, deceitful behavior, and inflicting the harm upon people on a very bigger scale. This is the category of monstrous man. So, what is monstrous man? Monstrous man is someone who looks like a human being, but whose psychology and whose moral sense are disordered or they're absent. So one of the more obvious examples of this would be a sociopath. A sociopath does not think or feel like you and I do. And given that their conscience is absent and their moral sense is absent, they can do so much harm to you and have no regret or remorse for it because those are concepts foreign to them. Someone who has destroyed their brain with very intense drugs like cocaine or meth, and who have gone into high levels of schizophrenia would also be considered someone whose conscience and moral sense are fundamentally degraded. There are so many different, categories of this person. But regardless of whether it comes from extreme drug abuse, or it comes from an inherent sociopathy, or it comes from whatever else, this monstrous human cannot be dealt with on the same moral terms that normal humans are dealt with. See, the idea of moral equality, which so many people are so willing and so giddy to get rid of because they think that the idea of equality has enabled some kind of deteriorative leftism to take over civilization. That's not what happened. It's false equality translated into equity that did that. But real equality, the equality founded and established by natural law, the equality founded and established by observation and induction of what man is, who he really is, what rights he has, what responsibilities he has, what duties he has, that kind of equality says, by essence of you being human, you have the same moral worth as anyone else. And that moral worth ought to be defended with as much vigor and as much conviction as anyone else, regardless of your status, regardless of association, regardless of any external factor. But it relates to your humanity. When you don't have a human essence, when you are, as I mentioned, a monstrous human, walking in a human skin suit, you no longer have a claim to equality. Because your essence is inhuman. Who you fundamentally are is inhuman. And therefore, the only just response for you is for you to be removed from the society, for you to be confronted in a forthright way. It's very easy to remove and confront a violent offender who slit someone's throat with a knife, or whose psychology is so disordered they will go up and just attack people with no regard. It's much harder to look at a politician that sits back in their chair and orders a drone strike into a village full of children with no remorse, or a principal at a local school who has been manipulating the staff and manipulating the system and lying and deceiving and hurting people indirectly through his power, or a CEO that sits up in a skyscraper who constantly maintains an authoritarian regime in his office and who deprives people of their resources unjustly, who's a swindler. It's much harder to deal with those kind of monsters than it is the monster you saw who killed Iryna. And until our society is willing to look at this holistically and is willing to stop looking at what immediately disgusts us, but also look at what is going underneath the surface, what is not being so hidden, which is not getting all the light social media, which is not being so much attention, we will not be able to confront the phenomenon that killed this innocent young woman. We will be unable to do it because we're not willing to attack the foundation. The foundation is there are those who walk amongst us who are not us. There are those who look like us who are not us, who are inhuman, and they must be dealt with. How so? Through institutionalization. That's the only way. Whether it's the crazy politician that likes to kill people for fun, whether it's the guy that slits someone's throat, I don't care. They must be forcibly institutionalized and taken away from the rest of society. That is the only way to maintain sociability and justice within this society. Also, we should also kind of see, just to make this point a little bit more clear, how monstrous humanity does influence certain kinds of pathological criminal behavior. Think of serial killers like Manson or Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer. Think of those kind of people who are perpetually violent with no remorse, perpetually violent because their conscience is disordered. Criminal behavior isn't necessarily due to social circumstances that people think it is. Criminal behavior when it comes to violence. Now, criminal behavior is a very broad category. Yeah, right. It can mean a lot of things. And some things that are criminal ought not be criminal because they have no relation to justice, or they're just things that were made criminal. But criminal behavior that includes violence. Criminal behavior is fundamentally a behavior. And behavior is a product of your will. And your will is informed by your conscience. And your conscience is founded upon your moral sense. If someone doesn't have a moral sense in the first place, in the case of the monstrous human, and their conscience is therefore disordered and has nothing to sit upon, then that means their will be left free of any constraints to run roughshod over everybody else and wring out destruction across civil society. And that then therefore means their behavior is going to be especially ruinous. That's precisely what we're seeing here. And until, my friends, we confront this issue, not with speculation, not with spectacle, but with moral clarity and with an understanding that there are some uncomfortable talks we have to have with ourselves, until that happens, we will not actually address this issue, but we can. My friends, this is a crisis of moral education, and this is a crisis of confronting some very hard truths about others that we may not want to confront. But if we can reassert the natural principle of justice, which emerges from our sociability and our moral sense in the society. And then we can also, most importantly, establish an understanding of the monstrous humans that walk amongst us and deal with them with conviction, with compassion and empathy, but also with precision. I do believe we're going to be able to stop more things like this from happening. And the character of our society will get better. The strength of justice and just action will also get better, and we will be much safer. But until we are willing to do these things, until we're willing to go in and go into the educational institution and say, you have corrupt justice, we have to actually deal with this, until we're willing to actually have these hard conversations about humans, some humans, about equality and our moral understanding, we're not going to be able to fix anything. But I do believe that there are enough of you that want to be pensive and want to fix this problem. And for that reason, I'm very confident that Iryna's unfortunate demise will not be in vain, that we will be able to stop this from happening by focusing our intellectual faculties, by focusing our moral conviction towards the point of solution. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can, my friends, to ensure that our channel is successful. Join the Pensive cohort, which is a collection of young thinkers who are going to go into the culture with philosophical clarity and moral fire to beat back some of the problems that we're having in our civilization. Join our Discord, which is in the comment section down below, especially if you want to be a cohort member. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Donate if you so wish. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please, please, please stay pensive. Thank you guys so much. Have a nice one.